Welcome to this episode of In the Interim. I'm Interim Dean of the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy, Bruce Mueller. In the interim, the purpose of it is to bring VIPs, alumni from the College of Pharmacy, into the community while we're in this sort of pandemic and talk to them about where they are in their careers, what they've been doing. We've had a real mix of careers, and I'm excited about today's because it's a little different twist than we've had on some of our other ones. I'm really happy to be able to introduce to you Brook DesRivieres. Brooke is a graduate of our program, and she did, like so many people I've interviewed this year, her residency at the Ohio State University. She did the 2-year residency there and got her master's in health system pharmacy, and has held a number of different positions along the way, mostly in Wisconsin. But she's actually, I'm going to have her talk about some of the different positions she's had because she's had a really interesting career path. So I'm really happy to introduce Brooke to us all. Brooke, welcome to In the Interim.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dean Mueller.
Well, our first question always has to be, what am I looking at behind you?
Yeah. So this picture is from an apple orchard. It's a pesticide-free apple orchard, which was kind of before its time. Now everyone's eating organic, but this is an apple orchard that my grandfather started. So it is in the middle of Somerset County, Pennsylvania. It's in Berlin, Pennsylvania. And this is where I grew up and went to elementary school. I went to Shanksville Stony Creek School. It was all one school, K through 12. And it unfortunately was put on the map on 9/11. That was where the plane crashed. So
That's right.
for the longest time, we lived on an unmarked road on this 80-acre organic apple farm, apple and pear. And after 9/11, all the roads came to be named. So it's now Black Bear Run. And my grandfather since passed, and none of the grandkids were in a position to move back and take over the farm. And so it sat there for a couple years. And about 2 years later, a family unrelated to us purchased the farm, and they have since rehabbed it and recovered it and invested a lot in it. And this is their picture. It's now called the Apple Barn, and it's on Airbnb, and you can go stay there. You can get married in the Apple Barn. They have orchard picking, and it just brings me so much joy to see it back and growing.
That is really cool. And so how do we get a small town girl from Berlin, Pennsylvania to the University of Michigan?
Yeah. Well, long story short is my parents are both from Michigan, Dearborn and Detroit. And my dad was in the Navy, so we moved around a lot, ended up living on this farm in Pennsylvania with lots of relatives. And again, my grandfather, he's a retired physician. My parents decided that we needed a bit more diversity. My whole grade was a class of 32. So they decided to move us to Saline, Michigan, right outside of Ann Arbor.
God's
And
country, right?
yeah. And naturally, the University of Michigan was one of my top choices for college.
All right. So as I mentioned in your introduction, you went down south to the city that cannot be named
Mhm.
and finished your 2-year residency and got your master's, and then you took just a what is the word? Rock took off. Your career took off on some pretty cool paths. So kind of walk us through some of those things.
Sure. So I have to tell you about how I learned about the master's residency at Ohio State. It wasn't quite on my radar. I would have been happy to work independent, happy to work health system. I was doing both those as internships during college. And it was a fateful mid-year. I was on a shuttle bus from a hotel to the convention center. And this year it was in San Diego. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame marathon was also going on. And you and I were stuck on a shuttle bus for nearly an hour, what should have taken 10 minutes. And
That had
it
to be
was,
terrible. That just had to be just hellacious.
well, it was there that you told me about the Ohio State program. And, we had paper booklets back then. So I'm looking up when their residency showcase was, and I made it. So we were delayed on that bus. I went into what would have been the showcase, went and met with Ohio State, got invited to the dinner that night, and the rest is history. So
All because of a delayed shuttle bus.
yeah,
You
and who
never
I was
know when you
sitting
have to be
next
networking, right?
to. Exactly.
But also one of the things for the students who are listening, it should never be a secret to the faculty what you want to do, so
True,
that we can help you make the connections. And I think sometimes students keep things secret, and that's the opposite of what you should be doing.
true, true. So entered into the ASHP match, or no, the PPS, the placement service, and met with 20, 30 some programs for a first position, and ended up boiling it down to two. One, a renowned academic medical center, the other, a little known Catholic healthcare system in northern Wisconsin. And I ended up going with the latter. I made a real connection with the people during the interview, and um, didn't really know what I was getting myself into with living in such a remote area. But Marshfield, Wisconsin is where I ended up going. And I thought I'll be there for 5 years, and then I'll apply for director positions, and I'll get back into the academic world. And 12 years later, through lots of mergers and acquisitions and divestitures and strokes of luck, I've been with that company, that health system, for 12 years.
Wow. Yeah, Marshfield, Wisconsin's God's country. Okay, my godfather lived there for years, and so yeah, if you like cheese, it's a great place to be, Marshfield, right?
It
Not
is.
far from Colby, Wisconsin, where Colby cheese is made. So not everybody knows that.
Yeah.
All right, so you've held you've actually held a lot of leadership positions, and maybe tell us maybe what you did in the last one or two, and then we're going to go from there as to where you are today.
Sure. So I was in a regional director of pharmacy position in
So
Metro.
what's a regional director?
It means more than one region. It means things
More
restructured.
than one hospital.
Yes, more than one hospital. Um, one of the things I reflected on in my career is that health systems restructure about every 6 to 9 months. And so during one restructuring, the senior leadership for pharmacy was consolidated. And so the title became regional director of pharmacy. I was in the Metro-Milwaukee area, and I was tasked with taking two disparate health systems and aligning them and working on the integration to become one. I was in that position when and living remotely. I was still living back up north, northern Wisconsin, and
That's like 3 hours or at least from Milwaukee, and here you are, their director.
yep, yep. And so I, burned that path from 39 South 41. I drove that a lot, and eventually established relations, got a management team in place to where I was able to work remotely, and found myself working on some statewide projects because I wasn't on site. I wasn't putting out the fire of the day. I was able to really dig in and get some of this work done for my peers as well. And so I had a couple of successful projects go through the capital process, which is big dollar money, big presentations, big implementation plans, that kind of thing. And so I wasn't looking, but I was approached to say, "Hey, Ascension's got this spinoff company, and we like what you've done with these big projects. Would you consider doing this? It's not necessarily in pharmacy." And so the last 2 years or so, I've been working on region-wide, statewide projects that are outside of pharmacy. So things like ED attachment, attaching patients to a primary care physician to decrease ED emergency department utilization and increase primary care visits. Been working on remote monitoring. So instead of having a nurse be asked to stay over at the end of their shift to sit in a room and do one-on-one monitoring for a fall risk, we've got technology that can do that. And you can have a technician working remotely, monitoring 12 patients at once on a screen. It's much more efficient healthcare. And so was blessed to be able to work in that area, and not only work with Wisconsin, but other states as well.
Wow. So is there anything that you were able to draw on from your University of Michigan days that you can rely on now when I hear you giving these presentations and doing all these projects that have nothing to do with pharmacy?
I would say, one lesson I learned at the University of Michigan is, never forget where you came from. So whether that be small town Pennsylvania, whether it could be the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy, um, I was fortunate enough to continue to cross paths with Sandra Chase. So I know she's an alumni. She's been on the board before. She had made a career move and ended up covering the Wisconsin market. And so here, she and I, two Michigan alumni at Wisconsin events, and we've continued to stay in touch and grow that relationship. And I consider her a mentor.
Wow, that's great. And honestly, people on the call, the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy Alumni Group is the strongest, closest. They will give you a hand no matter where you are, even if you're in northern Wisconsin. They're going to help you out, which is great. So I said at the beginning, you're different than some of our other guests. Not that you've done these fantastic things with your career at a pretty quick pace. Because if I was one of your faculty, then I think you're really young. So that's the first thing, and you're doing all these things, but you are in a different place than some of our other guests.
Mhm.
Tell us why, or how, or what's different about where you are today.
Yeah, I have my own in the interim going on. I am a free agent to speak to speak
You
of.
are in the interim, right?
I am in my own interim. So I talked about restructuring and mergers and acquisitions. So um, in some regards, I feel like I had made it pretty far in my career because through restructuring and not performance, my position was eliminated. And that's something that happens in these higher executive positions. And so that happened at the end in fall of last year. And when I was notified, I, of course, had a ton of feelings about it. But one of them was, oh my gosh, I can help during the pandemic. I was working at home, and yes, I was helping with COVID. We had stood up a national COVID hotline and national COVID home monitoring for people who were positive. And I felt, like I was contributing that way, but I also felt like I needed to go back to my roots and help as a pharmacist. You hear about the staff that are so fatigued and overworked. And I think it was the next day that I was notified, I was starting to put out feelers about where I could help the most. And that ended up being at a COVID field hospital. So the state of Wisconsin, the governor authorized the Department of Administration to turn a fairground into a field hospital. And so we're not talking about tents, it was a brick and mortar. But the Army Corps of Engineers came in, made it all negative pressure, put in patient restrooms. We used the ticket office as the medication room. And so I jumped on board as one of the pharmacists there. And I have to tell you, it was going back to my internships and going back to my rotations that really prepared me for it, because this was health system pharmacy 101. It was paper MAR, and it was manual dispensing, and it was, paper orders and everything. And I'm like, boy, I guess I am experienced enough to be able to know how to do this.
I like
Other-
that's I use the word experience too. So
yeah.
where was this? The county fairgrounds in what county are we in Wisconsin?
That was Milwaukee County. It was in West
Okay.
Dallas at the
Oh,
Milwaukee State
yeah, where the state
Fairgrounds.
fair is. Great cream
Yeah.
puffs at the Wisconsin State Fair. That's right. I'm whatever the food is, that's what I know what it is. So what's it like being a vaccine response specialist?
Yeah. So this is a good lesson learned as well. Each state has a volunteer registry for public health efforts. You could be a licensed individual, you could be a non-licensed individual, and ahead of time in preparation for public health emergencies, you can sign up on this volunteer registry. So I had been signed up with Weaver, Wisconsin Emergency Volunteer Registry. And I had been asked a number of times to go on deployments. So could you go work at this nursing home for 2 weeks? Or could you go um, help at a vaccination clinic? And one of them was at the Alliant Energy Center. So that's where the Bucks used to play. They used to split their
Walkie
time.
Bucks. Okay.
My kids have been to a monster show truck there, Disney on Ice. I got a request through Weaver to vaccinate there, and I accepted. And so I'm working for Public Health Madison-Dane County, and this pavilion where I'd say the monster trucks and the farm show would have been, that's now a drive-through vaccination site, and we do about 1,000 clients a day.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, someday we'll be done doing those vaccinations, and
Mhm.
you didn't expect that your next position was going to be as a vaccine response specialist, and you're going to be so you're in the interim. You're actually very busy now, but you're looking for your next position. And you and I talked about the fact that as you're getting ready for this, you have a career coach, or I'm not sure what term you would use for this. And you're our second guest now that we've had in the last couple of months to have one of these. What um, what does one do with a career coach, or
Yeah.
what's the value, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, my career coach was part of my outplacement. So that's what it's called when you find yourself in these interim positions. And I think it's a little bit different than a mentor. So a mentor is someone that you've kept in touch with year after year. You check in every year, and you talk about what's going well, what's coming up next, how are you growing, and that kind of thing. The career coach, this is an executive career coach firm, and it's for a defined time period. So this one's based in Chicago, and what it looks like is executives who are looking for their next position. What they used to do is say, you know, don't don't stay in pajamas all day. Get your suit on, get your briefcase, come to our nice Chicago downtown office. We'll put you in an office, and it's there that you're going to work on finding your next job. Well, during COVID, that's not an option. And
Sure.
so everything is turned into remote. So from home, I work with my career coach. Um, this has been invaluable for me. I haven't looked for a job since the PPS. And so things have just changed so much. I was way out of the loop. I was surprised to know that, these applicant tracking systems and algorithms are the first ones to scan your resume. And there's ways to get more keywords in there. There's ways to scan it from home and see what kind of match percent you get to know if you're going to get offered a phone screen. And so it's just been invaluable. So it was the little things like that of, how the job search has changed in the last decade. But then it's also things that I've never had the chance to talk about, like executive negotiations. I've learned that you can negotiate your outplacement before you negotiate your starting date. So you can ask for things like career coaches and pay continuation. Should there be a restructuring or a merger and acquisition? Things that I never thought to ask about. So the career coach has been wonderful. Introduced me to a lot of executive recruitment firms. I've learned just a ton, and it's going to make me all the better candidate.
Do you think you would keep somebody like that on sort of on your team even after you have your job? I mean, is there value that way?
Possibly. My career coach has been a recruiter. She's been in health systems. She just has the knowledge and the contacts, and I mean, it's just been great. So yeah, I think that might be one of my lessons learned out of this interim period.
So you mentioned that it's different looking for a job today from when you looked, more than a decade ago. So there's differences, there's technology difference, but then there's COVID on top of that. It's all coming together for you. And I'm just wondering, what are you learning about how it's different, and what kind of coaching did we give you back in the day that's not right anymore, that maybe has to be different?
I'm trying to think back. I think the coaching I received at Michigan was more about landing that residency or that first job and what to expect at mid-year and how to do the match process. And that was all very important at the time. So now it's more of how to brand yourself, how to have your marketing prepared. I have an executive portfolio, I have a resume, I have a CV, I have a LinkedIn page, I have all these things just ready to go. I have a marketing plan. I have contacts that I use, and one of my jobs is to do networking every week. So they talk. I've learned about the hidden market, that not all jobs are posted on a job board or one of the aggregate sites like a LinkedIn or Glassdoor, and that the more networking I do, people will have me top of mind for when there is a new position, or they'll see that spark and say, we want to create a position. And so that's a lot of the things that I've
Well,
learned.
I'm hopeful that in the interim will be the program that puts you over the top. But as you're looking for a position, if you can think back when you were coming out, you described your decision after you left your residency about thinking about this big academic center or
Mhm.
going to Marshfield, Wisconsin. Um, but what is different now about what you look for in a position that is different than what you look for then, or is it the same?
Yeah. Um, I'm definitely looking past the initial salary. So I think that's what my focus was on the first job was, what is the salary? How much can you take home? And now that I'm in a different place financially, professionally, with my family, you're looking at all of those intangible benefits. So there's some that are concrete, like the benefits and retirement matching and things like that. But now there's companies that have unlimited time off. So
Sign me up.
um, that's something new where you don't have to track your paid time off days. You don't have to roll them over. You don't have to cash them out. If you need to be off, you're off. You're at a high enough position that we trust that you're making good choices. So that's a consideration.
So why is
Um,
that? Why would that be important to you?
um, let's see. That's a good question. I
Because you've
I
worked like crazy your whole life. I mean, that's how you've gotten to where you got. So
Yeah, I honestly think that you perform better at your work when you do take time away. So not the crammed in long weekends, let's go to an indoor water park and cram 5 days into 3 days of vacation, but turning off the email, turning off the cell phone for a good week at a time, no alerts, no SOSs. I honestly think that you perform better. And so coming from a company that valued that. It's something that I'm looking for again, and to see whether the senior leaders, walk the walk, whether they do that. And so, if a company's got that unlimited time off, I would say that they do.
and parental leave, I assume, is in some of that.
Yes. So, I do feel like I've missed out on what I thought was coming was paid parental leave. I think that's going to be a conversation that comes up again over this administration. Um, and it's something near and dear to my heart when I was more in a family planning stage. Being a breastfeeding friendly business and having paid parental leave, those are things that I worked more acutely and volunteered my time. And now in my interim, I'm seeking other sources and ways to help. So anytime I hear of a company that is remodeling or building a new building, I insert my unsolicited advice in there about what accommodations do you have to keep women in the workforce, and have you considered this and that? And I've been successful in actually changing master plans at a couple places. So I'll keep having those conversations, but as soon as paid parental leave comes back on the radar for this nation, you'll find me at the top of the list of advocates.
So the work-life balance is something that you are prioritizing much higher than you ever thought of coming out of school, for sure. What were some of the things you did, particularly when you were really this high-placed executive, to maintain work-life balance?
Mhm. Um, I don't know that I had it very much during COVID. With our home offices being in the next room and with all the hair salons being closed, it was very acceptable to roll onto camera disheveled and in your pajamas because we're working 7 days a week and just working too much. But prior to that, I enjoyed working remotely. When I was on site, I was very intentional about spending time with staff and rounding and even helping out on site. And then that time away, very intentional about getting projects moved forward. So yeah, I think
Okay.
yeah.
But you talked about even getting involved changing the blueprints and plans of buildings. Do you have any recommendations for women in leadership positions? I mean, that is probably 2/3 of our student body, for example. Um,
Yeah.
any advice you have regarding
Yeah.
that?
So one, before you're taking a position, inquire about it, inquire about paid parental leave, inquire about, you know, paternal leave and the options there. Know your rights about working in healthcare systems and there's a whole system of support, whether it be your local public health or coalitions. But I'm rooting for you to stay in the workforce. And while I think paid parental leave would be great, it's a ways off. And so if you need to use time at work to pump for baby at home, I can help have those conversations. I can tell you what the laws are and whatnot. Um, I also think that, well, how do I say this? We we've had an extreme number of women exit the workforce lately during COVID, and it's going to be one of these, subsequent pandemics where we've had this loss of women leaders. Um, Anytime you're thinking about quitting or thinking about going down in your FTE, reducing your hours, I always turn back to Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. And I know she might be polarizing with her position, but she's definitely been through those times in her life where she had to decide if she's going to stay in the workforce. And now she's at a very high level of leadership nationally, and she's got an organization dedicated to helping women stay in leadership. It's those gaps or reducing hours that really um, prevent us from being at the highest levels of leadership.
Now, what the audience doesn't know is that when you were a student, you told me that actually your career goal then was to be you'll be the Sanjay Gupta of pharmacy. That's
Yes.
what you told me in my office. I never forgot it. Did you get there, or is that maybe one of your next steps here as we look at your career?
Yep, I definitely did say that. It's come up twice since we had that conversation.
Oh,
So,
really?
yep, while I was a pharmacy manager, I went through the Dale Carnegie course, and I highly recommend that for anyone who wants to improve their relationships and leadership skills. And so in this Dale Carnegie course, I had to make a vision board and I had to put pictures in writing of what I saw my future. And so I resurrected that. I had my picture and I said, this is Brook DesRivieres, the CNN pharmacy correspondent. I've been told my whole career that pharmacy, we have to tell our own story. If we have someone tell it for us, they're not necessarily going to get it right. And I used to watch the news and pick it apart and say, "Oh, that's kind of right, but it's not really right. Here's what I would have said." And so I always imagine myself being on TV telling the pharmacist story to the public. So that idea, I had to share that with my executive career coach, and I said, I want to do something fabulous in my next position. I want to do something maybe that's not technically out there and posted, and so we're working on that. I've got one foot in because my husband, he was in broadcast journalism for a good decade. He's worked at lots of TV stations, and he's got lots of um, colleagues that, that can make that happen. So he and I have done a number of stories. Back when we were in Marshfield, we had lots of television segments focused on pharmacists, pharmacy residents, pharmacy technicians, just because we had that relationship. And they were newsworthy. They were very good. But the closest that I've gotten to being the pharmacy correspondent is being a media advisor. And so what that is you could reach out to your local, you could reach out to a local chapter, you could reach out to a state pharmacy society. I happened to reach out to APHA and they put me through media advisor training. This was fresh out of residency. And so I'm on their list of people to put into contact with reporters and journalists when they're doing a story. And so I'll get an email that says, um, please let us know if you could meet with the reporter in the next 24 hours. Here's the topic. And so I get to help share pharmacy's story that way.
Well, and I think pharmacists got this great story to tell. I mean, who's going to vaccinate America? Pharmacists. And who developed these vaccines in record time? The pharma industry. If there was ever a time to tell our story, now's the time. And for the people who are on the program here, how would you recommend they do this? Because I think we need lots of people telling the stories in wherever we live.
Yep. Definitely reach out to your, if you got a local chapter of ASHP, if you're in your state society, let them know that you're someone who is comfortable speaking on behalf of the profession. They may put you in contact with elected officials just to have them come tour and be more knowledgeable about what all the aspects of pharmacy are. But APHA and ASHP, let them know if you're interested. They'd put you through formal training and have you on that list. I've gone on record and been, in publications as being interviewed, and then it can be as simple as helping a reporter know what questions to ask and never being mentioned in the publication. But it helps, again, tell pharmacy story in the light that we want the public to know us.
Brooke, we've covered a lot of stuff today. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
The careers have been such a different journey, and I'm excited to see where I land next. Um, Entertaining all forms. So academic medical centers, health systems, innovative startup companies, pharma, medical device companies.
Look at you. We're giving you this whole virtual platform. But I think not only, and I'm hoping maybe someone watching this is going to have this great job, but I think also for our learners to know that, your first job is not your last job. It hasn't been for me, it hasn't been for you, and it's not going to be for them. And that you have to sort of reinvent and rethink about what your values are and what you want to do next. And we've had a lot of guests this season about people who have changed paths and tried new things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work. Sometimes they work and you still lose your job anyway. And you're just going to, this is the way the world is today. But you've got to keep that resume dusted off, and you've got to do the things that you're doing to stay relevant in the workforce and keep that networking going. Even if you think you're in this dream job, you've got to keep it going.
Yeah, I agree. I've got a new term I've heard. It's called upcycle.
What's that?
So you're not being repurposed, you're not being reallocated, you're not being recycled, you're being upcycled.
Upcycled is the
So,
euphemism.
yep. So when you're in positions like this and you think, well, I could go for something lateral or I could take a step back, you need to take a step up and use your time in the interim to be prepared for something that's going to be even better than your last job.
This is the best in the interim ever. I love this. This is fantastic. Well, Brooke, thanks for being our guest. And good luck to you on your job search. I've got a slide up here that's got your email address. Can anybody students reach out to you if they've got questions about where you've gone in your career? And could potential employers also contact you in case they've got positions?
Yes, that'd be great, Dean Mueller. But for the students, please contact me. Keep this information. Contact me in the future when you're in a family planning position, when you're considering a leadership position. Happy to stay in touch.
Brooke, thanks so much for being a guest on In the Interim.
My pleasure.